Normally the security guy gets up there and spews fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and everybody goes, oh my God, that was depressing. I'm going to end on a high note today, and I don't mean to depress anybody as I go through my dialogue. I've spent the last 21 years or more, I'm bad at math, since 1993, let's do it that way, I've been responding to computer security breaches. My first job was at the Pentagon as an Air Force officer, where I showed up every morning and just hit page down, looking at log files, trying to figure out who was accessing what and who was using privileged access and in what ways. A lot of fun. It wasn't very long till we recognized that the Chinese government and the Russian government were hacking the United States, and .mil on .mil was fair game for cyber espionage. And that was in the 90s. Every breach was Unix machine against Unix machine. Bad guys would upload their source code, compile them on the victim machine, so it was real easy to do malware analysis because we had the source code. Fun times. Fast forward to now, it's a little bit different, and what I'm going to do today is kind of talk about the state of cybersecurity. And there's a nice position to have when you respond to breaches, and we kind of own that moment at FireEye. We get the, I call it, we're the oh crap button on the internet. When a company's hacked and they know it, they give us a call. Sometimes my phone rings, and it's a fascinating thing to do. It's probably the best feedback loop for security, because when we show up the breaches, we get to see how our technology is evaded, what are the threat actors actually up to, what processes work, don't work, what tech works and doesn't work. And so what I'm going to do is give you some of my conclusions in the next 20 minutes of what we've learned in the last year. Some of them have been recurring since 1998 when I started tracking all the conclusions to these breaches. But we've done over 500 breach investigations in the last 12 months. As I stand here right now, we're responding to more than 24 breaches. Every hour on the hour, our consultants, and we have over 300 of them fully deployed right now, find malware or backdoors or C2 that is not detected by any of the technologies in place, to include not detected by the AV vendors. So it's a pretty neat thing. We have 250 threat analysts in 19 countries that speak 32 languages that take in what we find on the front lines to try to figure out who's doing it, why are they doing it, what are they after, and we're starting to see pretty fantastic correlations. So I'll give you those conclusions. We've responded to, in those 500 breaches, it is global. We are in all the hot zones. We've got folks in the Middle East responding. Pretty crazy digital cocktail party going on there. We're in South Korea, where everything that happens in cyberspace in South Korea, they blame on the North Koreans. And Eastern Europe's pretty much a hotbed right now as well, and then the United States. First conclusion I've had, and I've had this since as long as I can go back in my career, there are no risks or repercussions to hacking companies, and you almost can see an East versus West in cyberspace. What you have is Russia is a safe harbor for offensive operations, China's a safe harbor, North Korea is a safe harbor, Iran's a safe harbor, and there's some others emerging right now. So if people can hack with impunity, and there's great anonymity on the internet, these attacks are just going to happen all the time. And I kind of put them into two categories. You can go through the nomenclature of the people hack for criminal activity, espionage, for the heck of it, whatever it is. I look at it as there's targeted attacks, there's a human sitting at a keyboard and wants to hack your company, and then there's the drive-by shootings, there's the spray and praise that are out there. But both of those kind of attacks, you can just do them with impunity. Second conclusion, when we looked at all the breaches we've responded to, and it's been like this since about 2005, it used to be in 1998 when people broke into a network, they were hacking systems. They were finding publicly available exploits, they were just scanning the IP space or domain names, looking for vulnerable servers and using publicly available malware to compromise those servers. That's changed pretty dramatically. Right now, over 90% of the attacks we respond to, when we find victim zero, it is a spearfish that led to the intrusion. The spearfish has a malicious link in it, or it's got an ARM PDF document or Microsoft Office document. But essentially, it's trying to get an end user to hack themselves. And over 50% of those breaches, there was no actual exploit. The attackers were using features of the programs we use to get you to execute malicious code. So attackers are exploiting human trust. 5 minutes ago, I just had to email a FireEye employee that the email they got wasn't really from me, and I'm going to give you my tidbit right now, and it'll blow it up. I sign all my emails with the exact same signature block, and that's how you know it's from me. It's, you know, I'm not that polite normally, but I sign every email I send, thank you, comma, Kevin, thank you, comma, Kevin, because the spearfishes are getting pretty good. So anyway, yeah, so I'm 10 minutes removed from somebody trying it on us with an ARM PDF document. So because attackers are targeting human trust to break in, what's the patch for it? It's pretty complicated and hard to do. What I've learned over the last 20 years is attacks are definitely following geopolitical conditions, and we are definitely responding right now to more breaches that I would say are tied to nation states for attribution than to the criminal element. And then there's a blurry line there in some countries as to was it state-sponsored or was it criminal, or is it the same people just turning their hat around when they get off of work. Give you some real examples, and you heard Tim talk about our report on China in 2013. But I never noticed this connection till 2013. We responded to the Syrian Electronic Army 6 times in the month of August of 2013. And I'm wondering, why are we responding to these guys? What's going on here? At that time frame, we were threatening armed conflict in Syria based on the use of chemical weapons in Syria. And the Syrian Electronic Army, whether they were just assembled, whatever they are definitely pro-Assad. And they hacked a whole bunch of media and entertainment companies trying to really read the email of certain reporters to figure out who's informing the West about the use of chemical weapons. We didn't go into armed conflict there, but the bottom line is tensions rose, so did the hacking. The biggest example I have for this, though, is the Russian government. I've responded to them, I'd say, several thousand hours of my career. I've been in Encase Enterprise or Encase Software doing forensics on intrusions done by state actors out of Russia. And for almost 18 straight years of my career, they had rules of engagement that they never altered. They had great counter-forensics. Every time we responded to them when I was in the military, or even after the military, when I was working in the defense industrial base, if we caught the Russians doing an espionage campaign, they didn't let us observe them. They would go away. The first time I saw that change was in the summer of 2014, where we're responding to a breach. The Russians know we can see them, but they're coming in over the wall every single day anyway. And I thought that was a big change after 18 straight years of them not doing that. So the rules of engagement started changing. Oddly enough, the same month, there were little green men in the Ukraine, and we did a large multi-billion-dollar embargo between our nation and their nation on certain goods. So you can see their aggression went up. They allowed us to observe them. They did poor counter-forensics. There's a few other things they changed, but probably the biggest change we saw also happened in 2016 when they hacked into the DNC and a few other agencies or nonprofits and leaked the email, like John Podesta's email. So the rules of engagement have escalated, and we're kind of in an interesting time right now to see, does it keep escalating, or have we found a new plateau for rules of engagement? China's dialed it way back. That's kind of good news for us when we look at geopolitical conditions between us and China right now. Because of all the public disclosure of the Chinese cyber espionage campaigns against Western nations, it's just they've reduced the target zone of what's fair game for espionage down to a smaller subset. Instead of just .mil and .gov and .gov, they'll still go after healthcare, and they'll still go after organizations that will help China take care of, feed, clothe, and help over 1.6 billion people. And by the way, I'm not anti-Russia, anti-China. We just go where the intrusions are, and it just so happens that they're behind quite a few of them. We're running into Iran more than ever before. There's no doubt that they've got a capability. There's a group we call the Newscaster Group because, well, they hack media. And the behavior of the Newscaster Group out of Iran, when they hack in the Middle East, is they hack in, they delete everything as fast as possible. When they hack in the United States, they follow different rules of engagement. And what we've seen is they're stealing the email of the press, essentially. So we're seeing a rise. We respond to more state-sponsored intrusions right now as an entity, as a company, than we do criminal acts or criminal actors doing it for money. One of the things, I came up with this slide because I was reading a Harry Kissinger book called The New Order, and there was all this discussion about balance of power and how they maintained peace in Europe as much as possible, although we had 2 world wars there in the last 100 years. It was all about having just 2 sides that were equal in power, kind of like NATO and the Soviet Union. We don't have that in cyberspace right now. We still have a whole bunch of emerging nations developing capabilities. We have our nation trying to iron out its rules of engagement. We have other nations figuring it out. And I can tell you we're at that time right now where nobody's really sure what the rules of engagement are internationally. So it's kind of fun to see. But what makes it interesting is it's so asymmetrical in cyberspace that you see developing nations going to cyber. You don't typically think of Vietnam as a powerhouse with espionage and military, However, we just released a report this week. We've responded to about a dozen or so breaches that we attribute to state-sponsored out of the nation-state of Vietnam. And they're actually really good at what they do. Custom malware, below the radar, targeting interests for the state of Vietnam, whatever those interests may be. North Korea does the same thing. So they're getting more and more active as well because they recognize, we just can't get those damn missiles off the ground every time. They tend to blow up. And in cyberspace, we can do a lot of activities. So, we got the privilege of responding a couple of years ago to a $81 million bank heist. The Central Bank of Bangladesh was compromised. And what was interesting about that is there was definitely, when you poll all our intel analysts at FireEye, there was a lot of folks that said, this may have been North Korea on the keyboard doing the intrusion and trying to get capital for their nation. So they're very active. And the asymmetry, I've used this analogy a lot because it's kind of unfair, is we're always on defense in cybersecurity. We're playing goalie, and when a nation state like Russia wants to hack into you, and sometimes they do, it's like going against Wayne Gretzky on a penalty shot. It's just the puck's going to get in the net, and you have to figure out how far behind it you're going to be. And we also only see about 80% of their capability. I've always felt that under times of true duress, that extra 20% will be unveiled, and it'll be a fascinating moment for us. So it's pretty gloomy, right? So here's the good news. We recognize operationalizing security is hard. I think in the United States anyway, the threshold being sent is if your organization is hacked by a drive-by shooting, you will probably be deemed negligent and irresponsible, kind of. There will be pundits that tell you that you are anyway. And those drive-by shootings to me are the automated programs. Spear phishing, that's not very good. Automated spray and pray, things that are exploiting one-day attacks or things that should have been patched, but maybe you didn't patch them or not. But when you look at operationalizing security at certain industries, it's pretty darn complex. There's only so many tools you can have to go from the 4 billion alerts you're getting a day in your security operations center at a large 1A enterprise to get from those 4 billion alerts down to like the 2 or 3 that matter. And I was listening to the other speakers. Machine learning will be one of the things we'll turn to. Analytics is one. Signatures aren't going away. Heuristics, rules, correlation rules, whatever you have to do, but ultimately sometimes it gets down to people as well and determining the impact and consequence. So it's a tough job, and we're going up now against more nation states where I don't know what the deterrent is. It makes it a little bit more complex. And this was shown very recently. It's impossible right now to do a security presentation without talking about WannaCry. Most of you might have heard of this. I think cry was short for the word crypt. But this was just a piece of malware that propagated since, I believe, May 12th. It was launched on the internet. I don't think anybody knows who did it. We haven't figured out victim zero yet. It largely seems to be coming out of Eastern Europe. But all it was is a server message block exploit, port 445 as the spreader mechanism, and which I didn't think would be very effective, by the way, and to attach that spreader mechanism to crypto so that somebody can do ransomware and charge $300 or $600 after they encrypt your drive to do it. So the reason I thought this was odd is when I first saw that this was spreading, I feel this. If your company got hit by this, I don't know how. In the late 90s, we would do assessments for ISPs and cable companies that were offering bandwidth to consumers and small companies, and even they block port 135 through 139, the NetBIOS over TCP ports. Everybody blocks port 445 from the internet. So the question becomes, how did over 200,000 machines get infected by this spreader? And that just shows you that the hygiene still isn't there yet, that even a server message block exploit can spread rather largely. Now, I always like to say it could be worse, so I always put that down at the bottom. I mean, whoever did this attack, cobbling together ransomware with a spreader, the uniqueness of the spreader was that it may have been coded based on the Shadow Brokers leak, which some people say were tools used by the US government. It would have been a lot worse if whoever did this let it spread quietly for about 6 weeks and then turned on the ransomware right away, because ransomware is a pretty obvious attack. The detection mechanism is simple. Your machine's encrypted, and it still runs, by the way, because the ransomware encrypts your data files, but not your executables and your DLLs and such. So your OS will still run, but it's immediately detected, and this thing did not sleep for any length of time, which is kind of neat. So anyway, what did we learn from it? Basic hygiene is not as good as we'd like it to be. Over 200,000 machines. A lot of those companies that were impacted by this were healthcare, and if you're a CISO of healthcare, that's a bad situation to be in, because I've found over the years of responding to breaches, most organizations do not know what's going to happen and what functionality they lose if they take their organization off the internet. Sometimes your IP phones don't work. Sometimes your employees cannot buy lunch because your credit point of sale systems don't work. Sometimes the gate doesn't come up when you're trying to park your car. So it's fascinating when you make the decision to come off the grid, what the impact will be. And the same thing, once a spreader gets into your network on SMB and you haven't patched, it could be a pretty bad situation on how fast that can spread to everything. All these attacks propagate because there's anonymity on the internet. And you'll have the privacy folks say anonymity is a great thing because it's an aspect of privacy we have to maintain. You'll have a whole nother camp that says with anonymity on the internet, how do you do proportional response? How do you actually have risks or repercussions to the folks who did it? And I'm kind of 50-50 on, are we going to figure out who did the WannaCry stuff? Because that was kind of a launch and let it rip. And then what I've heard so far is nobody's actually collecting on it yet, which means the person who did WannaCry, if he was really, really good, he'd be able to get away with it, so he'd start collecting anyway. If he was really, really bad, he would go to collect because he's just not smart enough to lay low. Whoever did WannaCry is in the hulking middle here of recognizing, hey, I better not go get my money because it's one more chance to get attribution, and they obviously didn't want it to be this successful and get this much attention. And then whenever there's nation-state tools leaked, they tend to be crafted a little bit better than what your average malware crafter can do because there's contractors making it, and anytime, it just shows the portability. Any nation can leak if they choose to do so, or if another nation gets the stuff from a drop site, because every modern nation does actually do operations in cyberspace, and they do use third-party sites that they don't have 100% control of in other nations as their drop sites that handle their toolkits. I think every nation has every other nation's toolkit is what I'm trying to say. And we can all start leaking those things. The minute we do, the average criminal or the kid that's experimenting, their game just got a lot better. So that'll be a challenge for us, and we'll see a lot of dialogue on that. It's my opinion cybersecurity has never been more important. It's an industry that's not like, no offense to Blockbuster, but it's not going to have go the way of Blockbuster video. It's that right now you're seeing a convergence between physiology and computing systems. I'm very convinced that the next watch I buy from Apple will have the capability to tell if I'm having a stroke long before I do, and my doctor's going to know about it before I do. I think all that technology already exists. 5 to 10 years from now, that'll be the norm, that we maintain our homeostasis with the aid of different devices and wearables. And then we're seeing an absolute convergence between consumer tech, enterprise tech, and even the government. So all this stuff's coming together, and the impact and consequences of any breach have never been higher. Because of that, that means security has never been more important. So talking briefly about the future, the optimistic notes. So what's going to come out of things like WannaCry when hospitals are getting shut down based on ransomware and indiscriminate attacks? I think you're going to see international norms emerge. They have to. There's already an undercurrent of it happening. So you're going to see countries that abide by and pierce anonymity when there's wrongdoers, and there will be risks or repercussions for those who commit bad acts from certain countries. There'll always be safe harbors, and in the nations that are safe harbors for these bad acts, I think you're going to start seeing over time a different internet experience. It's just going to happen. You're going to see identity management. It'll be an interesting thing. We're all going to be identified by the devices we have, whether it be the car that we're in or the phone that we're holding. That's going to come right up against the privacy advocates, and there's going to be some duels there. But I think anonymity on the internet is actually going to come down a notch in most countries, and the judicial process will provide what I call conditional anonymity. You have anonymity until you do something wrong, and then people will pierce anonymity behind it. So we'll have that. And then the future is also going to be, and we already have this today, but it's going to get worse. You'll walk into your own home, and you'll have to start thinking you're surrounded by intelligent devices that actually listen to you, make decisions based on what they hear, and you're going to have potentially a refrigerator trying to order you your gallon of milk, as well as a competing microwave trying to order your gallon of milk. You're going to have all these different components of your life made easier for you, that the next time we have a conflict, whether geopolitical or even above that where it escalates, then the cyber attacks that we see hitting enterprise will actually hit our lives in ways that we've never had, at least in the United States, we've never had war in the last couple hundred years impact us this way. So it'll be kind of fascinating, and that's why these international norms are going to be done appropriately. So I'll end with, so what do you do about it? If you're sitting in this room, you're like, security is going to matter. What do I do about it? It depends on your role and what you do, but I'll leave you with what I've always asked when I get the brief boards after they have breaches and such. There's 3 things that you want to ask your chief information security officer or whoever's in charge of your security just to gauge how good you are at security. The first is I always like to ask CISO, well, how would you break into our organization? Because you don't even care what the answer is, you just care there is an answer. Anyone who's any good at security has to be thinking, how do you evade our security? So you ask, how would you break in? And if the person knows how, great. If they know people who know how, that's great. If they have no idea, that's interesting. They ought to be looking for that way. Second, based on the answer to the first question, how would we detect that if it occurred then? And if the answer is, well, that's how I'd break in, but man, we wouldn't detect that, you obviously have work to do, right? So, and third is, what is worst case scenario? Everybody who's head of security should have a worst case scenario, zone of potential outcomes. So there is a breach, they can immediately say, well, worst case is they stole the CEO's email, they're posting it online, and it's a disaster. And best case, they only stole credit card data. Could be a whole different range of things, but those are the 3 questions that have gone a long way. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and hopefully you got a takeaway from this. Thank you.